The U.S. Central Bank raises its key interest rate by another 25 basis points, widening the gap with South Korea's key interest rate to its biggest yet. What does it mean for Seoul Central Bank's upcoming rate decision? South Korea and Japan began discussing agenda items for the upcoming summit, with Tokyo's planned release of Fukushima wastewater likely be included. A former military compound in central Seoul opens to the public for the first time in over 100 years as a children's garden, a day before South Korea celebrates Children's Day. Good afternoon. We begin with the U.S. Central Bank deciding on yet another rate hike, raising its key interest rate by 25 basis points. This as taming inflation still remains the country's priority, despite looming fears of a banking crisis. Our economic correspondent Shin Young has our top story.
The U.S. Federal Reserve raised its interest rates by 25 basis points on Wednesday, taking another so-called baby step. This marks the 10th consecutive rate hike since March last year. And with the Fed's move, the U.S. benchmark interest rate jumped to the 5% to 5.25% range, the highest since 2007. The Fed's efforts to tame inflation come despite ongoing concerns about recent bank failures and follow the takeover of First Republic Bank by banking giant J.P. Morgan Chase. According to the central bank, the U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go.
All eyes were on the FOMC, with watchers wondering if the Fed would pivot rates, as it's been widely noted that rates have reached close to their peak. However, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell responded to the question of whether the central bank will pause its monetary tightening in June, saying there was no decision yet, but the committee will consider the impact of tightened monetary policy on economic activity and inflation, as well as financial developments. But he did hint at a possible pause in the monetary tightening cycle.
In the statement from March, we had a sentence that said the committee anticipates that some additional policy firming may be appropriate. That sentence is not in the statement anymore. That's a meaningful change, that we're no longer saying that we anticipate.
Meanwhile, despite the expected rate hike, U.S. stocks closed lower on Wednesday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.8%, while the S&P 500 slipped 0.7%, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq lost 0.46%. The falls are attributed to the Fed not clearly announcing the direction of its future monetary policy, which raised concerns that it may not begin cutting interest rates soon. Shin Young, Arirang News.
The latest decision by the U.S. Fed widens the rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. to the biggest ever. Amid mounting pressures on the exchange rate and potential capital outflow, the Bank of Korea will be making its own decision later this month. Our Lee Soo-jin has the prospects.
South Korea's interest rate gap with the United States is at its widest ever. The U.S. Federal Reserve on Wednesday voted to increase interest rates by 25 basis points, its 10th straight rate hike. This has widened the interest rate gap between the two nations to 1.75 percentage points. A significantly wide interest rate gap increases the risk of capital outflow to overseas markets as investors seek higher investment returns. The Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong, however, has emphasized numerous times before that the BOK will not hike interest rates simply because of the widening gap between the two nations. According to the Bank of Korea, the country's foreign exchange reserves in April were up $610 million from the previous month. This marks the second consecutive expansion of foreign reserves. The BOK said that the rise was largely driven by the boosted value of non-dollar assets when converted into the greenback as the value of the US dollar fell. The Consumer Price Index also slowed its rate of increase to the 3% range last month, the first time it has been lower than 4% since February last year. The won, however, has been losing ground against the greenback despite the weak dollar, as the domestic economy struggles with sluggish chip exports and 14 straight months of trade deficits. If the widening interest rate gap causes the won to decline further against the dollar, prices of imported goods may surge, leaving the Bank of Korea with no choice but to consider a rate hike. The exchange rate and the capital outflow during the 3 weeks leading up to the monetary policy meeting are thus expected to heavily influence the central bank's rate decision. If the BOK decides to keep its benchmark interest rate unchanged at the upcoming meeting, it will be its third consecutive rate freeze. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Preparations are in full swing ahead of the Seoul-Tokyo summit this weekend. A range of issues will be addressed, with Japan's planned release of wastewater from its destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant possibly included. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young tells us what to expect.
During their summit this weekend, the leaders of South Korea and Japan are likely to discuss trilateral cooperation with the United States on North Korea and supply chains, as well as possibly Tokyo's plan to release treated nuclear wastewater into the ocean. On Wednesday, National Security Advisor Cho Tae-yong met with his Japanese counterpart Takeo Akiba, who came to Seoul to prepare for Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's visit on Sunday. According to President Yoon Suk-yeol's office, the top security advisors agreed on the need to strengthen security cooperation with the US. They also attended an inaugural session of an economic security dialogue focusing on enhancing supply chain resiliency and energy security. The three countries' joint response to North Korea's growing nuclear capabilities and provocations, as well as various threats to economic stability and supply chains, are expected to be major discussion points during Yoon and Kishida's talks. Afterwards, the Japanese PM on Monday is set to meet with conglomerate leaders who represent South Korea's largest lobbies, according to industry sources. Their talks will focus on ways to expand bilateral exchanges in strategic sectors, including semiconductors, batteries, and electric vehicles. Also, according to a South Korean daily, Seoul and Tokyo may also address sensitive matters, including the latter's plan to discharge 1.3 million tons of treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant in the summer. A diplomatic source told the Seoul Shinmun Daily that the issue may well be discussed as Kishida seeks endorsement to release the radioactive water. While the International Atomic Energy Agency has green-lighted the move, Japanese fishermen and civil activists, as well as surrounding countries, including South Korea in the Pacific Islands and China, have protested against the move, as scientists and environmental activists warn of the possible impact on human and marine life, and question the credibility of Japan's safety reports. South Korea is part of an IAEA safety review task force on Japan's wastewater disposal plan. But given its proximity and the range of sensitive bilateral issues, Deputy Director of the National Security Office Kim Tae-ho said in March that a separate scientific probe should be conducted on a bilateral basis. Kishida's two-day visit to Seoul will mark the resumption of regular top-level visits, beginning with Yoon's trip to Tokyo in March. Yoon's March visit came after his administration's decision to compensate Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor without forcing contributions from Japanese firms. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
As Ukraine prepares for a spring counter-offensive against Russian forces, the Kremlin is accusing Kyiv of attempting to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian President Zelensky denies the claims, calling them a pretext to justify massive strikes. Choi Soo-hyung has the latest.
Russia has claimed that Ukraine attacked the Kremlin with drones in an attempt to assassinate Russian President Putin. The Russian presidential administration released a statement stating that 2 unmanned aerial vehicles targeted the Kremlin on Wednesday night and that their military successfully neutralized the threat. It called the incident an act of terrorism aimed at the life of President Putin. The statement added that Putin was unharmed and was the Kremlin, and that Moscow reserved the right to take action at a suitable time and place. However, the Ukrainian government denied any involvement. President Zelensky, who was visiting Finland, denied the allegations, saying that Ukraine does not have enough weapons to carry out such an attack and that its military is only defending its territory.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapon for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin. We leave it to tribunal.
In recent days, there have been several explosions and acts of sabotage at energy and transportation facilities in Russia, and Ukraine is expected to launch a large-scale counterattack soon. Meanwhile, Russia could escalate its attacks on Ukraine in response to the Kremlin drone incident. According to local authorities in the southern Ukraine province of Kherson, 16 civilians were killed in a massive attack by Russia on the same day. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Now on to the devastating mass shooting in Serbia. A teenager opened fire in a school, leaving 9 dead, including 8 children. The country has declared 3 days of national mourning. Lee Sing-jae with more.
A 13-year-old boy is under arrest accused of killing 9 people, including 8 children at a school in the Serbian capital of Belgrade on Wednesday. The shooting took place just after the first classes had begun in the morning. Police say the shooting was premeditated, as he found sheets of paper that included detailed plans, including the names of the children he wanted to kill. Killing the school security guard first, the suspect then opened fire in a history classroom, as it was closest to the entrance of the school. Another 6 children and 1 teacher were hospitalized after sustaining injuries from the shooting. According to the Serbian Interior Minister, the boy brought 2 guns from home. He was also found to have Molotov cocktails in his possession during his arrest, which were not used during the incident. He was taken into custody after he called the police himself, but at 13, he is below the age of criminal responsibility. His parents were also arrested. The prosecutor's office said the father, who owned the guns legally, will be detained for up to 48 hours. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić expressed his sorrow over the tragic incident, with the country preparing for 3 days of national mourning.
Serbia is unified in a sorrow greater than we remember. When we are unified in sorrow, we have to look for causes and the responsibility among all of us to look for solutions so something like this, no matter how unpredictable and unexpected it is, never happens again.
The Serbian president announced a moratorium on new gun licenses other than for hunting, a revision of existing gun permit rules, and the surveillance of shooting ranges and how weapons are stored. Serbia has strict gun laws, but a high level of gun ownership. Lee Sing-jae, Arirang News.
A large public park is opening in the center of Seoul, turning a former military compound into a family-friendly garden for the next generation. The Yongsan Children's Garden will open its gates on Thursday, a day before the nation celebrates Children's Day, a public holiday. Stretching some 230,000 square meters, the garden faces the office of President Yoon Suk-yeol, reflecting his move to relocate to Yongsan District to be closer to the people. The grounds are being returned to the people of Korea after 120 years of occupation, first by Japanese troops, then U.S. forces. Featuring a large lawn area, a sports field, and a number of leisure facilities, the garden currently requires reservation for first-time visits, 5 days ahead for South Koreans, and 10 days for foreign nationals. As the annual meeting of the Asian Development Bank takes place here in South Korea, our finance correspondent Lee Dae-yeon spoke with bank's special senior advisor on its key agenda, climate finance.
The impacts may come in different forms, but they're getting more extreme. Speaking about the climate crisis, ADB's Special Senior Advisor Warren Evans says developing countries will be the most severely affected by accelerating climate change. Rising sea levels and increasing tropical cyclones are affecting the Pacific Island nations, while the South Asian region, home to millions of farmers, is exposed to increased storms and flooding. Cities are no exception either, with their large populations of low-income households.
So all of these areas in Asia are highly vulnerable to climate impacts, and we don't have a choice from the ADB side but to focus on building resilience of those communities, those poor, vulnerable communities, to the impacts of climate change. And that's very much part of our focus.
Economic development is still a must for these countries. Evans says if development is not designed to be resilient to climate impacts, it will eventually fail, as social development and low-carbon resilience are inseparable. And that's what ADB is working for.
How can we change the way that we support those kind of projects so that at the same time we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing resilience to climate impacts? We need to do this through the development process, not separate from. And it's not an either-or. We have to do it.
And to do this, the expert says public sector finance should be used to mobilize private sector investments in climate actions.
So we need to work with governments using public sector resources to, for example, help them establish a regulatory regime that enables private sector to invest, to have the institutions in government that actually encourage and support private sector involvement in climate action.
And Evans added that ADB has benchmarked South Korea's experience as the country has been working on green development in recent years.
We've worked with South Korea to use your experience in the urban sector on energy efficient urban development, on green urban development, on transmission, on water, good water management. We've worked with Korea for a long time to use your experience to help developing countries learn from Korea.
He says some countries have made considerable progress in integrating low carbon into their transport and energy development process, though some questions remain about whether they can keep up with the growing impact of climate change. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News, Manila.
From K-pop to K-beauty and K-series, Korean culture is nothing new anymore. But if you want to get a sense, taste, and sound of the roots of Korean culture, this will be the right time to explore the royal palaces. Our Kim Jung-sil reports.
Gyeongbokgung Palace welcomes visitors from all over the world. The 9-day festival highlights all 5 palaces in central Seoul by offering cultural programs day and night, from musicals and concerts to plays. One of the most popular spots here at Gyeongbokgung is Saenggwabang, a royal kitchen that used to make desserts and tea for the kings and queens during the Joseon dynasty. Here, visitors can enjoy desserts made with dried fruits, pine nuts, and rice cakes that were served for the king and queen.
These days, you can often eat a lot of Western desserts, but I really enjoyed the traditional Korean desserts here that tasted somewhat more high-end and has a clean aftertaste.
After relaxing a bit and enjoying the king's dessert, visitors can walk down here to Sujeongjeon Hall and enjoy some music. Another highlight of this year's festival took place at the nearby Changgyeonggung Palace. This year, visitors can enjoy a play where the whole palace is a stage and actors walk from hall to hall for each scene. The play reenacts King Yeongjo's 60th birthday preparations. King Yeongjo was the longest-serving monarch of the Joseon dynasty and also spent a lot of time here at the Changgyeonggung Palace. More than 200 people from all over the world walked around the palace to watch the play.
It's really nice to see right in front of me a little bit what I've seen in historical K-dramas. You see the costumes, you see a little bit about the stories, and it's interesting to see it a little bit like live right in front of me.
One festival organizer said he hopes visitors will better understand the depth of Korean culture by witnessing and experiencing what palaces used to be like in the past.
The K-Royal Culture Festival is to show the culture of Korean royal palaces. We want visitors to witness and experience what those palaces used to be like in the past, so they can better understand the roots of Korean culture.
This year's festival runs until this Sunday. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In northern and western Rwanda, search and rescue efforts are underway amid floods and mudslides triggered by torrential downpours. At least 129 people have been killed. Rwanda has been hit by rainstorms since last Tuesday, which have destroyed homes and roads. According to the Rwanda Meteorology Agency, more rain is expected over the next few days. The government has asked residents living in areas at risk of flooding to relocate. We turn over to Europe, where police have arrested over 130 people with links to Italy's 'Ndrangheta mafia. The arrests were made across several European nations, including Germany, Italy and France. It's been described as the largest coordinated operation in the fight against Italian organized crime. According to Europol, the 'Ndrangheta network focused on trafficking drugs from South America to Europe and Australia. The mafia group is also accused of supplying weapons from Pakistan to South American criminal groups. Considered one of the most powerful criminal networks in the world, the 'Ndrangheta is based in the southern Italian region of Calabria and has thousands of members globally. Now, American sprinter and long jumper Tori Bowie has died at the age of 32. She was a three-time Olympic medalist and two-time world champion in track and field. According to Bowie's agent on Wednesday, the athlete was found dead at her home in Orlando, Florida. Authorities found her after she had not been seen for several days. The cause of death is still unknown, but is not being treated as suspicious. Born in 1990 and raised in Mississippi, Bowie initially played basketball before switching to track. During the 2016 Rio Olympics, Bowie won a gold, silver and bronze medal. She also won 2 world championship titles at the 2017 World Athletics Championships in London. Her last official competition was in June 2022. And finally, 4-time Grammy Award winner Ed Sheeran has threatened to quit music if found guilty of copyright infringement. The UK singer-songwriter is embroiled in a legal dispute over whether his 2014 track, Thinking Out Loud, copies parts of Marvin Gaye's 1973 classic, Let's Get It On. During a court appearance, Sheeran reportedly said that if the plaintiffs won, quote, "I'm done, I'm stopping." The lawsuit was filed in 2018 by a company that owns part of the copyrights of Let's Get It On by late co-writer Ed Townsend. Sheeran has said that any similarities between the songs are purely coincidental and that these would be too common for a copyright violation. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Hate to disappoint you and your kids, but storm force conditions are in the forecast for Children's Day. It already started to pour down on Jeju and the south coast from yesterday afternoon, with heavy rain alerts issued on the resort island, dropping 20 millimeters an hour there, and it will pick up as the day goes on. And that rain will gradually spread nationwide today. Jeju and the south coast could see up to 150 millimeters through Saturday morning, and the capital and west of Gangwon-do province could receive up to 120 millimeters with strong winds. So you need to adjust travel plans for the Children's Day weekend, but at least the conditions will improve by Saturday afternoon while skies remain cloudy. Daytime highs look similar to slightly lower this afternoon, and those of us in central regions and Jeollado provinces need to brace for heavy rain tomorrow. Looking ahead, next week looks to be a calm and promising one, with Monday marking Parents' Day here in Korea. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of the day.